Hello, Abhinav. So lovely to see you. And I'm really happy and so glad that we've been able to have this conversation. And thank you so much for taking time out to have this very, very important conversation about sports and the importance of mental health in sports. You've, of course, been an advocate of mental health all along your journey, and especially in high performance sports. So, no one better than you than to be a part of this launch of AMP, which is a vertical at Empower. And so I really would like to thank you earnestly from the bottom of my heart for doing this, Abhinav. Really means a lot. You lending your voice will really make all the difference in our efforts.
No, thank you very much. Thank you for having me. It's a great pleasure to be with you. And firstly, at the outset, my sincerest congratulations on your effort. I think it's a very important subject. It's a subject where, especially in the sporting world, there's so much misconception that surrounds the mindset of an athlete, the mind of an athlete. And I think one of the things that the sports ecosystem across the world hasn't done well is humanizing the athlete's effort. We're all athletes, but before being athletes, we're human beings. And I think that has to be the central focus. And again, really well done on your initiative, which I'm sure will have a profound impact on the landscape of Indian sport.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that, Abhinav. So, I just had a couple of thoughts in my mind, and I thought, I wanted to just ask you a couple of things. So, you were one of the first few who really spoke about your tryst with mental health and the challenges, the experiences, the difficulties. And I really applaud you for that courage because, back then, mental health was not spoken about at all. It was hugely stigmatized. And then, particularly coming from sport, where generally it's very biased. You wouldn't want to think that a sports person is dealing with mental health issues, but you still talk about it. What made you talk about it back then?
Well, I'll have to go back a few years, and frankly, when I started speaking about it was right after my victory in the Olympic Games in Beijing, the time which was supposed to be the time of my life, but ironically, or in whatever way, it was probably my toughest challenge. The time after Beijing, up until Beijing, I'd spent about 15 to 16 years of my life going to bed with a dream that was to win a gold medal at the Olympic Games. And I would wake up every single morning trying to make that dream come true and trying to make that dream a reality. And one fine day, I had this beautiful gold medal that I was chasing in my pocket. I was all dressed up with nowhere to go. This great victory or this high achievement also created a massive void in my life where from one day to the other, I was left with absolutely no motivation. I had a deep void and frankly didn't know what to do with my life because the whole existence of my life is oriented towards that one moment and never planned or never thought about what would come next. So it was an incredibly challenging time. And of course, initially it was also I was very confused on what I wanted to do. Of course, I was very fortunate, to be honest, because I've always been brought up in a very psychologically safe environment back at home, and my parents and my family, my sister, have always supported me through thick and thin, and for them. Their love towards me did not increase just because I had a gold medal around my neck. And that, I think, was initially a critical factor. But of course, to come out of that situation, I also had to seek professional help and seek professional help quite quickly because sometimes you're not able to channelize your thoughts with your loved ones so clearly. And you almost need somebody external to be able to do that. But coming back to your question, why I decided to speak about it and speak about it openly, firstly, I thought that it would be very powerful to share my vulnerabilities with others. My vulnerabilities, not just during the time after Beijing, but also vulnerability during my athletic career. There were good moments, but there were also very challenging moments also on the mental side. And I thought by just speaking frankly, by speaking honestly, it would empower another athlete, because sometimes, there's so much of a misconception that is surrounded in an athlete's persona that, athletes are almost supposed to be immune towards any kind of mental health issue or mental health disorder. But in fact, I think an athlete's life is even more challenging and potentially has even more red flags than a normal life of another person, because we're dealing with success and failure on a day-to-day basis. That can be very, very challenging. I spoke about how I had to deal with success, and that was how it was challenging for me. Then there are injuries. There are injuries, physical injuries that happen, which could be career threatening. It's not just the physical injury; it has a massive toll on the mindset, the pressure of performance. We live in such a hyper competitive world where we've stopped enjoying the journey, and we only reward ourselves with an outcome.
For interruption,
And
voice is not
that
coming.
again can lead to issues and can be a very big red flag. Then there is also, I think, another very important challenge in an athlete's life is an impending end of a career or a transition out of sport. Because most athletes, as athletes, we tend to leave very so a life which we put all our eggs in one basket, and we don't necessarily do one thing well, which is have balance and create dual pathways during our sports career. So that transition again is a big red flag. So I just decided very early on in career, I wanted to speak out very openly about it, because I did believe that speaking about it will empower the next athlete who may maybe challenge themselves. And also speaking out and continuously advocacy towards this important topic is important, because that leads to people thinking about it and leads to organizations playing and prioritizing very important aspect.
Yeah. So that's really great, Abhinav. I mean, because back then, like I said, to think about it was very, very visionary, and to think that it's going to impact other people, which I'm sure it must have. But when you did come out with it, what is the did you sort of receive any backlash, or did you receive any kind of negativity when you were so open about it?
I think people found my behavior strange, for sure. Here I was supposed to be on top of the world, and there I was grumpy and sad. So obviously, I think the sensitivity towards the topic way back then was absolutely not missing. It was absolutely missing. I mean, we're just about starting to destigmatize this very important subject now. But back then, I think the sensitivity was not there. And I think also one could not really speak so openly about it, like the way we're having a conversation so openly about it now. But like back there in 2008 and even earlier, it was difficult. And I think you had to almost find your security net, and you had to find people who would appreciate or who would be able to answer, to understand where you're coming from and not judge you. That I think is very, very important. And I think for me, I was fortunate to have surrounded myself with people who always believed in me, who were there for me, not just when I was on the top of a podium, but were always there for me when I was also struggling. And those are your true supporters. And I was able to lean on them for support. And then I think it was one of my coaches who then helped me through the situation. I started consulting mental health experts to get me out of that void and that lowness, and that depression, which I pretty much struggled with for a year and a half after the games, and it took a while to get out of it. But it was also, I think, another important aspect is sometimes energy management, I think, is also something which is very closely linked with mental health, and something we don't focus on, because we think that we are supposed to be robots, and we're supposed to be these high performers who have to get going every day. But at the end of the day, we're humans, and we're vulnerable as anybody else. And when I did win that gold medal at the Olympics, my energy was completely drained, in the sense that I was physically drained, I was emotionally drained, I was mentally drained. And it also required a period of time to just let go, and to recharge my batteries. And that wasn't easy. I remember one of my breakthrough moments actually came when I decided to go on a Vipassana meditation course. And at that point, it was interesting, because at that point of time, I was wanting to actually leave the sport and move on to a next calling. Um, and that was my primary drive, to go to Vipassana, to find my new calling, because I had no idea what my next passion was going to be. So I go to Vipassana, where I had to meditate for 8-9 hours a day in complete silence for 10 days. And all I did in that Vipassana meditation course was to think back to my sport, and think back to how I loved the process of what I was doing. And that was a great learning for me. And it was very, 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 it had a clear link to my mental health, because that day, that Vipassana experience, realized that what I truly loved was my journey. What I truly loved was putting in the effort every single day. For far too long, perhaps I too was guilty in putting my self-worth to where my name, equating my self-worth to where my name would appear on the ranking list of a sports competition. And that was very, very silly. For far too long, I believed in an equation that a gold medal is going to equal happiness. But frankly, from that day onwards, I reversed that equation, where happiness had to become my gold medal. And I think for me, that was a very big breakthrough moment. It's not about winning at all costs. I think it's about winning well, and prioritizing your well-being, I think, is critical.
That's really well said, Abhinav. And I think that's so true in life also, right? We all are always chasing some goal, and we're always equating that goal with happiness. And it's really profound that you said that after the success is when you felt the void, and you had to learn how to deal with that. And when you're also talking about that, that also reminds me, in a very strange way, there's a correlation with the postpartum depression that I went through, which happened after Ananya was born. And very much so, like, you're expected to be happy, or it's a most important and joyous occasion, and your firstborn, and here you are feeling so low and out and depressed and not understanding what is happening. And again, back then, there was no, I myself didn't understand what I was going through. I didn't even know something like postpartum depression existed, and I was completely at sea. I just didn't know what to do. And I realized only much later that there is a thing called postpartum depression. And just knowing that gave me such a sense of relief that, I was not going cuckoo by feeling what I was feeling. So it's sort of, in a strange way, very similar to what you just said about, you're expected to be happy, but you're not. And, then how do you deal with that?
Yeah.
So, which, also makes me think that you're talking about the importance of well-being through the journey, and like how you're saying the journey is so important. So would it make sense? And again, for sports psychology, is it important that we provide this through the journey of the athlete, and not just only at critical points in his journey?
See, I think sometimes, sports ecosystems and athletes and their support staff, I think it's very important to understand that, performance in sport, and the mental performance in sport and mental health are two completely different fields. And I think sometimes clubbing them can be a mistake. I think it's also very important to realize, for psychologists and personnel working with athletes, that while you're working for, mental performance, and, we all know that, the resilience an athlete requires to perform on the field of play at high pressure situations, and all of that kind of strength, and the mental strength that is needed. But the foundation of this mental resilience and the foundation of this mental strength really is formed from, the foundation is how healthy you are mentally as a human being, what kind of balance you have as a human being. And that has a very direct influence, a very, very direct influence on your mental performance as an athlete. So I think sometimes it's so important to also step back a little bit and first address the athlete as a human being, because that forms the foundation of how you're going to perform mentally on the field of play. And I think sometimes we miss that, and sometimes we're all so focused and so driven in this tunnel vision on how to get better on the field of play, but how we live outside of the field of play has a direct influence on how we will react in critical moments on the field of play. So it is both aspects, I believe, are very closely linked. And the foundation, of course, has to be that human well-being has to be at the heart and center of performance. If we keep that in mind, I'm sure our athletes will succeed more, and our athletes will be able to sustain success for a much longer period of time. So that, I believe, is very important as we get on this journey of really taking India to the next level and our athletes getting better in sport. It's important that in the decade, I really believe the next decade or so will be a decade of development of sport in India as well. That means that many more young Indians will compete in sport, will dedicate a good amount of their years into sport. What does that mean? That also means that we are going to have a far bigger number of Indians failing in sport, because the very nature of sport. In sport, you will fail much more than you succeed. So how do we deal with this situation which is going to come up? We're going to be able to deal with this situation where we also ensure that athletes have a balance in life. The athletes also have a dual career pathway during their playing careers. The athletes are able to establish a degree of balance in their lives as human beings also during their playing days, because these are elements which will be critical, absolutely critical on their life after sport. And these aspects, I think, have a very direct influence on both the mental health of an athlete, but also the mental performance of an athlete. And I believe that a balanced athlete, an athlete leading a balanced life, has a far greater chance of succeeding, and succeeding in a sustainable way and in a consistent way on the field of play as well. Because when you have an athlete going into a top competition or an Olympic final, when everything depends on that, where their self-worth is dependent on that result, then the pressure to perform is just too much. It's just very, very, very difficult to get through that situation. But when we create an environment, when we create the generation of athletes who also have a degree of balance in what they're going to be doing, then they approach it in a very, very different way. And I think the ability to deal with pressure, they will be able to deal with that pressure in a much more effective manner. Pressure is not going to go away. Whatever amount of sports psychology we provide, the pressure is not going to go away. And that is something that they all have to soak in, that they have to work with and coexist with. But all these other aspects of the mental well-being of an athlete, the mental health of an athlete, has also a very direct influence on their performances on the field.
Right. So you're saying that both aspects become important. I mean, the general overall mental health of the athlete needs to also be looked upon and focused on. And of course, how do you enhance performance, and which is where the sport psychology bit of it comes in. So kind of
I mean,
integrating.
absolutely. I mean, if the athlete is not healthy mentally, or if the athlete is having issues as a human being,
Right.
you can't expect the athlete to be at his or her best in terms of at the human limit of human performance. It's just going to happen, not going to happen. It may happen once or twice, but the consistency of that will definitely it'll have a toll at some point.
So how did you manage it, Abhinav? Like, say, at crucial points, when you're on the field, which is what is, the most important thing that you're working for. Did you at that time have somebody like a mental health professional who was guiding you at that point on how to think or what techniques to apply?
Well, I think, and I'll be very candid and honest with you, I didn't do it well. I did not have balance in my life as an athlete, and that's why every time I get an opportunity to talk, I always advocate for this very important aspect, which is it's very easy to not consider. As an athlete, at one point of time, I became completely obsessed with performance, and that did help me achieve goals. I achieved many goals in my life. I became an Olympic champion. I became world champion. I won many championships, but I failed, and I failed in achieving my fullest potential and my truest potential. And now that I have a chance to look back, I would attribute that failure to this lack of balance that I had in my life as an athlete. I would attribute that failure uh, that I did not humanize my effort enough. And I think that was, while it helped me achieve goals, it didn't help me get to my very best ability. And that is why I think whenever I get a chance and an opportunity to interact with athletes, I keep pushing this narrative, because I really believe that it is very critical
Uh,
to achieving your best and achieving your fullest potential.
right, right. So in this journey, Abhinav, since of course, I mean, the coaches also then play such an important part, right? Because if you had somebody, for example, to show you the right path or to tell you that, okay, you need to get more balance and this is what you need to do things right. And which I would imagine would be the coaches because you're with them, you're spending so much time with them. So,
No, that's a very important point that you make. I think the mental health of an athlete is directly related to the environment that the athlete is exposed to. So as much as work we do with athletes, I think it is even more important to advocate all this work, specifically in an India sporting ecosystem, to the entourage of the athlete, to the coaches, to the support staff, because it is they who are going to be with the athletes day in and day out. And it's so important for us to ensure that they create a psychologically safe environment for athletes to train in. I think as a society, and specifically in India, I think another thing which I'd like to see a change in is how we view failure. I think we don't view failure well, and I think success in life, success in sport is really about failing well. It is absolutely okay to fail. And But it is important to learn from all those experiences.
mm,
It is also how the ecosystem that surrounds you views a failure and views success. I think is very important as well. And I think that is something that, advocacy work and empowering coaches as well is important. I've had some experience working in the Indian ecosystem and also in the area of mental health. And when we started, we were challenged massively because there was stigma. The athletes didn't really understand what is this whole mental health stuff that I'm talking about. I'm only concerned about winning. And the coaches thought that it was all rubbish. So we faced resistance early on. So we decided that we are going to have workshops only for the mental well-being of coaches. And that was a big turning point, because for the first time somebody started thinking about the coach's well-being, and they were able to have a greater amount of sensitivity towards the topic. So and that was a big breakthrough moment, because then the coaches started becoming advocates for mental health as well. And I think going forward, I think that is going to be an equally important aspect, not just to focus on the athletes, but to ensure that the whole ecosystem is empowered, not just with support, but also with knowledge on what it takes, and what mental performance is about, what mental health is about, and how they're so related to get the best out of their athletes. So I think
Yeah.
that's important
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah. Because also I feel that, when you're setting goals for yourself, right? I mean, obviously there will be days when you may not be able to perform to the level that you want to perform for that particular day, even in training. And I mean, I'm sure very often coaches also, not for anything else, but also tend to push you. And there are days when you may not want to get that push. Maybe you're just having a bad day. I mean, the body is so dynamic, right? And every day can't be the same. So I guess that for the coaches also to understand that, I think would be critical in your overall performance, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's where the advocacy work with coaches is so critical. An athlete's life sometimes gets hard, because, most of the people who the athlete is surrounded with is just focused on getting the best out of the athlete. And it's very easy to forget that the athlete is also a human being. And if you notice that, many times athletes share a very close relationship with either their doctor or their physiotherapist. Because in an athlete's circle or in the athlete's entourage, these two individuals end up being the only ones who are also looking after the well-being of the athlete.
Right.
That
Yeah.
starts wanting performance out, right? So that again, you'll notice that athletes are able to share their vulnerabilities with these individuals more. And I think we need to see that happening more with also the coaches, because it will be so important for the coaches to really understand that. And that takes time. It's not just the environment that is created, but it is also, it takes time to build that relationship with the coaches, where you're able to really have that full amount of trust and faith, where you're able to share your heart out, you're able to bear your naked truths into what you're going through and what you're feeling. And sometimes, I've in a funny way, I keep saying that athletes are also the best con artists that exists in the world, because every day we wake up and we are supposed to believe that we are going to be the best, and we are going to go out there and win. But if you really think of that logically, it just doesn't make any sense. So sometimes an athlete is also putting up a show. An athlete is also putting out a lot of bravado, but underneath it, sometimes there is a completely different existence to that athlete, and that existence needs to be communicated to the coaches, to their entourage. And only when they'll be able to communicate there, they'll really be able to work on performance more effectively.